Welcome to everyone. Thank you for coming. This is the first such event that we've ever hosted at Cfib, so we're pretty excited about it, and we're really glad that you obviously are as well to turn up at this hour in the morning. I want to thank all the candidates. They're not here just yet, but we are very delighted to get all of the main top five, I guess, as it were, to attend today. And also thanks to the National Post, who has been our partner and sponsor in this event, and also to the Empire Club of Canada, who's also partnered up. Well, you know, I've heard it said all too often in Toronto in the last few years that if you want to own a small business in Toronto, all you have to do is buy a big business and wait a while. However, and unfortunately that has had a fair bit of truth to it in recent years. As you probably know, small business is extremely important to our economy, not just in Toronto, but provincially and across the country. Small firms represent about 50% of economic activity, and they also punch above their weight in terms of job creation, usually creating 70 to 80% of the net new employment in any given year. And even during our recession, over the last 3 years, small firms held on to their employees, and that was one of the things that helped us weather the recession here in Canada much better than a lot of other countries did. So obviously this is a hugely important sector, and we certainly believe it deserves much better treatment, especially here in the city of Toronto. I think it's terrific to see the engagement in this election. It's certainly the most exciting one I can remember in my time, and of course municipal politics typically gets an even lower rate of voter turnout than do provincial or federal elections, and they aren't great either. So I think it's wonderful. We're seeing some debate. Unfortunately, it seems that we all have to get mad as hell before we will get engaged, but thank goodness we are, because I think from my standpoint as someone who tries to affect change in favor of not just small business, but the economy overall, it's often frustrating that our voters do not get engaged in these important issues that affect all of our lives, not just businesses. So today we're going to be addressing the priorities for this very important constituency, and I just have a few slides to just kind of help set the context for our debate here today. And our first slide, what we're showing, presto changeo, there we are. This is a survey of our members, small business members in Toronto, on how they rate their local government on a number of issues. Awareness of small business sector, 86% said poor. Reasonable property tax, 82% poor. Fairness of bylaws and regulations, 56%. Control of government wages, 92% poor. Value for money, 78% poor. So clearly, and you know, these are pretty abysmal results for the city from this important constituency. The next slide shows, in terms of out-of-control spending, over the last 10 years, spending in the city has increased by 65%, and it had a rapid escalation under Mayor David Miller's term. The next slide shows the comparison of overall spending, and you can see that dotted line shows when Miller was elected and how spending just took off. We use as possible kind of proxies for sustainable levels of government spending, inflation, and population growth, and you can see those on that slide as well. You can see how spending has far, far outstripped any of the more logical indicators of spending. And I think, you know, it's kind of interesting when we look at the international context right now. We have seen in a number of countries around the world, Greece being the most notable example, but also a number of other European countries, when the public sector, government spending gets so out of hand, ultimately they do pay the piper. It takes longer. In the private sector, of course, they're actually competing with somebody, so usually the payment comes a lot earlier. But even in government, with the legal ability to extort us all in increased taxes, even in government, we do have to pay the piper. And so it's much better to get a grip on that before we're in a crisis like Greece, like many U.S. municipalities, many U.S. states as well. So it's not too far away from us now, so we need to get a grip on it before it's a total crisis. The next slide shows the massive labor costs. And of course, the City of Toronto, like most governments, over half of its total spending is wages and benefits. And here, the average wage and benefit advantage, and we're comparing here the same job in the city versus its counterpart in the private sector, 36.4%. And overly generous benefits as well is part of this, and of course, early retirements and pensions. These are all so out of whack with what anyone in the private sector can afford for themselves, and yet the private sector taxpayer is being mightily taxed to ensure that public sector workers have way, way better benefits than they do. And let's face it, the final analysis, the private sector pays for the existence of government. It's not the other way around. So again, this is unsustainable too. I also want to mention policies like union-only contracting. How absurd is that? When tax-paying businesses that are not unionized, and the vast majority of our members are not, nor do they need to be. You're a 5-person firm, you don't need a union. That's just absurd. They are not permitted, they're taxpayers, they're not permitted to bid on city contracts because they don't have a union. That is absolutely ridiculous. Next slide, unfair property taxes. Of course, in the city, the ratio of the average paid by businesses to residents is 3-to-1, so 300% basically. And of course, usually, and this is on the same value of property, by the way, and usually also businesses get fewer services, typically pay for their own garbage, pay for an awful lot of their own services that residents don't have to pay extra for. So that's another imbalance that needs to be addressed. And finally, on a survey that we do annually with the National Post, we call it our Communities in Bloom, and it looks at entrepreneurial friendly cities across Canada. There was a total of 96 of them. Toronto came in 96th. So again, the evidence is pretty compelling. We need some significant change. Happily, I think we're seeing alternatives being presented, and we'll be discussing them here at this event today. And at this point, I'd like to introduce our moderator for the debate, which is Rick Spence. And Rick, just to give you a little bit of background, you probably know Rick. He currently writes for the Financial Post. He is a columnist with the Financial Post. He previously was the editor of Profit magazine for quite a long time. And he also is a business owner himself. So I think he can relate very well to a lot of the issues that we have that we're going to be talking about today. So welcome, Rick.
If we could get our candidates to the front, please. And while they're marching in, and you give them some huge applause, I hope.